Yeah, my sister came to drop something off for me. Um, yeah, so I'm trying to like explore what's possible within a given army beyond just like what is good. But the way you kind of have to start, good is the thing that people often say like, oh, that unit's bad, this army's bad, but rarely is that actually necessarily true. A lot of the time, they just require a different play style. They require you to lean into different parts of the game than just like combat math or the simplest avenue to win. And there's a huge amount of room to do that in Warhammer, which is why I'm a little bit surprised why you see so little of it. If you look at like a lot of the lists that I've done well with, they're constantly ones like everyone's like, how does this even win? Because people tend to have gotten this habit of thinking in very straightforward terms in Warhammer, of like just slam, what is the best combat math, what's the tankiest, whatever. But that's not always necessarily the strength. So I'm going to go into some alternate ways to kind of play the game and approach the game, while also going to these really interesting builds that I think are quite interesting and powerful potentially. Some of them more powerful than others, but one of the ways I'm going to be doing that is by going into the regiments, the armies of renown. Some which from army to army are like wildly varying in power levels for sure. Some of them are very strong, some of them are very weak. But even the ones that are weak, there's something interesting that can be done there if you approach it with the right mindset. So I'm going to be walking through some of the ways to think about that. But first, we gotta understand what most nurgle lists look like right now. Let me move this around a little bit so we can see that better. There we go. If you want to like do something off meta or explore what's not the standard status quo, you do kind of have to understand what is the standard baseline and why. Baseline is not always what's best. It's just the most common approach. It's the easiest starting point to come from. It's kind of hard to go wrong with, but does not necessarily mean it is the best way to play armies. Frequently, the most popular list I've found is not even close to the strongest version of the army. It's just the one that's the most obvious. And like you'll see that with like, for example, Seraphon recently. People keep building Croak, but Croak has been absolutely terrible with an abysmal win rate. And then like people are finding a bunch of success with like Skink Cavalry and stuff like that, but people are like, no, you got to play Croak, and it's like it it's bad. It's the wrong choice, but it's the most popular choice, and it's not been good, you know. So there's a lot of time these like sleeper builds that require a little bit more insight and thought to get the best out of. It could be maybe sometimes more risk reward, but if you're willing to kind of adjust your play style and really work on it, you can get better results from weird lists than you can from standard lists. So what do the standard lists look like? First of all, pretty much everyone's building Taliban. I think in some factions, this would be more informative than it is here. The reason people are building Taliban is basically because there's the strongest units in the army right now, the ones that have like the best math and that just are like undercosted and stuff, don't really have a sub faction that does that much for them. I do think that like I think it's the Plague Cyst is the one that gives the +5 control. I think that one's quite good. And I think you'll see some more of those show up as people get more comfortable in the book and start to get into more of the nuance. Whereas Taliban is just kind of like it doesn't have you can put it in any army. It's not the strongest in my opinion. I think that Nurgle's Menagerie and Plague Cyst are both stronger, but you can put it into literally any list. It doesn't care what you're playing, so I think that's why it's so popular. So, but it is massively more popular, which is interesting. There's also something to be said that people tend to not rate the demon lists very highly right now, and I don't actually agree with that. I think people think that the demons are bad because they don't fight as straightforward well, but that's not what they're trying to do. So some of these are kind of going into some of that. The more informative thing I think for Nurgle is the units that are popular. If you look at this, let's move this down a little bit. Rodigus, namely Soggy Rodigus. It's not really the regular Rodigus that's seeing this level of play. It's mostly the Soggy one. So because he gives the rend around you and like he helps you basically fight straightforward a lot stronger and beat people up better. You see Belga in almost every single list because she's super, super strong and she's versatile and like you can't really go wrong with her. She's also weirdly tanky. She's definitely undercosted. You're seeing a lot of people spamming basically the very undercosted models. Rot swords are definitely undercosted. What kind of surprised me is how many plague bearers there are up here because all the dialogue I've been seeing, people haven't really been liking plague bearers, and they're actually probably the single unit I rate the lowest out of all of Nurgle. So I'm a little bit surprised to see that, but they are up there. But everything else kind of fits what I've been seeing. You're seeing a lot of people running like 20 rot swords, a variety of the little pox. What are they called? Pox wretches. Every army's playing basically Belga. Rodriguez is extremely popular. And then you're seeing kind of a smattering of random other things. Ridiculous Slimix is in almost every list because he's also undercosted. So you're seeing these units that are kind of being played heavily because they're currently undercosted. And like it's kind of hard to go wrong when the book first comes out, and sometimes the balance disparity isn't great. But you can expect a lot of those get hit. So some of this is going to be going to what could you do once there isn't such a big gap and the points get more adjusted, and now everything's more equal playing field. You're going to have to think more about how you want to build your list. So we're not going to be focusing on builds based around Rot Swords, Belga, Sagi Rodriguez, and Pox Wretches with like a couple random threats. We're not going to be really looking into that. That's kind of like the standard way to build. The Maggot Lords list that you play is actually super dope and really strong, and I think very underrated. Maggot Lords are great right now. All three of them are super strong. What's kind of interesting to me, if you look down here, Morbid X Twiceborn has almost no games played, which is really interesting. I think it's basically literally just Matt Jones playing it, but I think he's very strong. I think he's one of the best war scrolls in the book, and he makes the army operate to a degree that's like kind of broken, and one of my lists is really pushing into him. So let's jump into some builds. Now we know it's popular, we're doing something that's not popular. We're going to start with one of the armies of renown, the Cycle of Corruption. Cycle of Corruption is kind of using the wheel that was used in the previous versions of Nurgle, like in 3rd edition, where every turn the wheel turns and a different buff happens, and you can kind of adjust the wheel back and forth a little bit and get army-wide buffs, but it's losing a lot for that. It's a white one. This is kind of the core of what's going on in it. There's 7 different sections of the wheel, and it goes clockwise, and you roll to see which one you start on, and you kind of just go down the clockwise. You can do some adjustments with spells and go back and forth. But I think this Army Renowned is never going to see a lot of heavy play because a lot of them aren't as strong as you would expect. Like, they're a little underwhelming. Like, it'll be like the enemy army has -1 to charge. Your guys have +3 control. That one's actually pretty good. But for something you can't necessarily fully control when you get it, should probably be a little bit stronger. However, there are some things that I think really do stand out as being more powerful than the rest. And those are sort of the ones that we're going to try to get more out of. So firstly, a natural vitality. Or maybe it's fecundity or whatever. It says different names right there, but it's probably just a typo. Your non-monster Cycle of Corruption heroes have Ward 4+. That's a pretty strong ability. There's a couple interesting things about it. One, they don't really care if next to a tree, whereas normally they would. Secondly, it just makes them really good at fighting. So we want to try and kind of take advantage of, if we can get into that one, which is sometimes you have to play more patiently, sometimes you have to do other tools to get there. But that one's something worth investing into, right? Like, if Ward 4+ is a big deal. The other one I think is pretty strong. The other one's like you can't really do the build into, but this one's also pretty strong. Where melee weapons of your army basically all get crit 2 hits, except for the heroes. So you can get a little bit more damage output and a little bit more tankiness. That's kind of leading into this fightier style of list. There's also like an artifact and command trait that kind of lead into more fightiness, more like straight up brawling and stuff like that. But I don't necessarily think that the Revolution and Revulsion cycle is going to outclass some of the existing battle traits that you do have, like disease and things like that, on its own. However, I did spot something that I think is really powerful. It's basically these two things I think are super interesting, especially in combination with the Ward 4 Plus and the extra damage boosts. So, namely, so epidermal cystitis, you can basically with a nurgle wizard, you can give them -1 damage and everything coming into them, which is just very strong. You give a super tanky, super fighty character. It has to be on them though, so there's only really like a couple things that it's actually good on. But when you do get on that unit, it's quite strong, and the really powerful ability, the one I think that actually defines this Army of Renown, is Rank and File. So this one says you basically pick an enemy, visible enemy infantry unit with an 18. If you get the spell off, each time a model in that unit is slain, on a 4+, return one slain model to a friendly non-hero Cycle of Corruption unit within 6. So, there are some models that you can play in this that are very strong, but not heroes. For example, Puscoil Blightlords. Puscoil Blightlords are 8 wounds apiece. They move pretty fast, they hit very hard, except when they're not charging, but they still hit okay when they're not charging. So every model you return for them is worth 100 points. So there is something that's really worth building into. It kind of wants you to play these more threatening, powerful, expensive models that aren't heroes. So how do we take advantage of that? Well, here's the list. Blow Up Rotspond is taking advantage of that spell where he's at -1 damage. He casts it on himself. He's pretty darn fighty. He kind of wants to be up front. He's a wizard, and so he can cast the spell on himself, or he can target the other unit. He gives like a variety of debuffs and really useful abilities. He's just good in this list. And we got Belga as well. There's some pretty good prayers, by the way, in other spells. I didn't list everything, but there's some interesting other prayers and spells in here, but they aren't like game defining. They're just useful. So Belga can help move you around with the cycle to get into the cycle that you want with her prayer ability, and she also gives +1 to cast around her, so you can make Blow Up at +1 to cast, and it makes him pretty likely, because the spell then basically goes off on a 5 on the dice, to be able to say every time a unit on that dies, I can bring back one of these very expensive units I have here. There's also a Rotbringer, Sorcerer, and a Harbinger of Decay. So they basically also have the prayers and spells. So you have a little bit of flexibility and resilient, like a redundancy to keep like throwing these spells out, trying to get this ability off. And you have some Pox Wretches that are basically just there to screen. Like, don't really worry about it. They're just there to hold up some space. What the list is really, really doing is taking those 8 Blight Lords and the Lord of Afflictions and throwing them at stuff and casting that spell on them, and then every time every time they die, you're basically have a very, very high likelihood to bring back several Blight Lords a turn. And each one you bring back is very hard to deal with. So, like, let's just say you lost 3 Blight Lords in a unit over the course of the game. Get that spell off of one unit, charge it, even just the Lord of Afflictions, like, they don't have to kill the unit. Lord of Afflictions comes in, charges them. He's got a 4-up ward right now. Hits them, he's got +1 Rend from his artifact. There's all these really strong abilities. And every one of them that dies on a 4-up, you can bring back an entire Blight Lord. And it's really not that unlikely that you end up bringing back somewhere from like 200 to 1,000 points over the course of a game, because you can keep bringing models back to these. Sloven Knights are kind of similar. They're 5-wound models with 3-up to 5-up saves, so they're really, really hard to deal with, and then you can start casting spells and bringing them back. I wish I could fit 3 more Sloven Knights in this list, and maybe you could. Like, maybe there's a way to kind of adjust some of the stuff. There's a lot of room to, like, take a different angle on it. But either way, it's still really good. They leave one Sloven Knight alive with 1 wound, and then you cast that spell, hit them, kill like 2 infantry models, bring back 2 Sloven Knights. And it's just really, really hard to stop that from being brutally effective. You had a good amount of prayers, a good amount of spells. The Wrathful Cycle's attuned to gear, and it's just pretty easy to get. it's pretty reliable scoring. So you're basically just like fighting and brawling and bringing back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of points of models every game. The big downside is it is stuck on that one spell, so if he does keep getting unbind, but it goes off on a 6 and you're +1 to cast. So you're doing pretty good, and your units already work. One of the things I definitely think is underrated in Nurgle is our +4 Blight Lords. They hit it like way harder than people give them credit for. Hey, what's up, Noah? They're one of the highest damage. They're probably the highest damage unit in the game, and not in the game, in the army. If you give some buffs on them, they don't have access to all the buffs, but in this sub-faction, you can give them +1 to rend, +1 to wound. And you can obviously all attack, and from the Lord of Afflictions combo, they can get +1 to rend on the riders and +1 to rend on the mounts, and then get +1 to wound from a prayer, I believe. Might be a spell. So they can end up hitting really, really hard, picking all sorts of units up, and then they get hit back, and they don't really die. And you can kind of string them out and be annoying. Because dealing with 32 wounds on a 4-up, 5-up is rough. But you also see the crit auto hits, crit do hits as well from the cycle, so they can really blow things up. I think this list is pretty interesting. Sometimes it's also helpful to take a look at what it looks like on the table. So I went ahead and for each of these armies, I took a picture of them so you can kind of get a sense of what it looked like on the table. It's not a huge army, but it's very elite and very combat oriented, and pretty mobile. So you can really take these 8 Puscoils and the Lord of Afflictions, who, by the way, he can buff 2 units at the same time, and kill almost anything in the game with them. And then not really worry too much if you start losing them. So you can kind of throw their weight around, and you can use them for their own screening. You can use your threats to screen because you get the spell off, hit them, and you're bringing back hella models. If they leave even one alive, it's as if they did nothing. So I think there's something here that could be quite potent, and I would love to see someone try that in a tournament. I think I probably would bring it to an RTT and give us a practice, or at least play it on TTS. But this is sort of what I'm getting at, where you can look at different ways to approach, and maybe certain parts of that sub-faction aren't as strong, but there's something really powerful there. Okay, so that is the first of 3 lists that we're going through. Cycle of Corruption. Now,